Right, I just sort of wanted to sort of ask you first, Ella, sort of obviously your journey in sport and in football, how did you sort of get into the industry, and does your interest come from when you were younger, or sort of where did your interest in sport sort of come from?
Yes. Well, I started playing football when I was probably about 8 or 9. I didn't actually come from a sporty football family at all. A couple of girls down my road played on a girls' team, and came knocking on my door one day and asked if I wanted to go to football training with them. I was like, I was 8, so I didn't really have an excuse to say no. I was like, yeah, okay, let's go. And so really sort of got into grassroots football like that, and then played through like a lot of my childhood up until I got sort of like 14, 15, which I guess we'll come on to talk a bit more about later. But actually, no, like I never really studied sport. I studied languages at university, which is my other passion. And then got into sport really because after graduating, I got into football coaching, well, through uni and after graduating. And then that was kind of like a point in my life where I was realizing that everything that football had sort of done for me, actually, it was doing for all of these other women and girls that were involved in football. I'm like super passionate about the power of sport and physical activity in football in terms of the off-pitch benefits. So not necessarily about athletes and being professional, but actually like what can it do for like your normal, average, everyday person. And that's something I started to sort of realize post uni when I started getting into coaching. And yeah, it kind of like went from there, got involved in a bit of research and more coaching, and started my career in football.
It's amazing what you're doing at Our Goal. Is there anything specific that inspired you? Like, where did the idea to start it come from?
Yes. So, as I mentioned, I got involved in football quite young. And then I absolutely loved it. Like, football was such a big part of my childhood. I wrote an article about this, but like, I actually went into Own Clothes Day in year 7 in my full city kit, but like shin pads and everything. It was just like next level. Um, and then as I got older, hit like 14, 15, my relationship with sport started to change, and with football and sport at school as well, because I just started to like become a teenager. Like I was more self-conscious. I cared a lot about what people thought about me, how I looked, and actually that didn't fit very well with football because, you know, I didn't want to be like going out into a field and getting like wet. I'd done my hair and I'd done my makeup, and I didn't feel like football really fit with that anymore. And that was sort of the football element, but also the same thing was happening for me at school as well with PE. So it had always been my favorite subject. Like what is not to love about PE? That's what I used to think. Like, you're not sat in a classroom, you can be like running around in a sports hall. And then when I got to like 15, I just hated it. Like, I hated my PE kit. I feel like it's quite exposing if you're sort of self conscious and you've got body confidence issues as you're growing up. Like, being in a PE kit in the middle of a sports hall is not helpful. Um, and so I eventually like dropped out of football, hated PE, like went from being really, really sporty and loving sports, just like not doing anything. Um, and so I was lucky that when I got to university, I got back into football and like realized that what I'd been missing out on, and started to do a lot of research and working with a lot of other women and girls involved in football and sport. Um, and really seeing that what happened to me is just not a unique problem. Like so many women and girls go through this where they drop out of sport. Women in Sport did a study in 2022 which found that 43% of girls drop out of sport in their teenage years. That is literally like nearly half of girls that we're talking about here. So it's a massive problem, and is I've sort of realised it's not just one that I faced, but one that so many girls are still facing, which is why I set up my organisation, Our Goal, which I guess I will talk a bit more about. But essentially, what Our Goal does, it's a not for profit organisation. And the main sort of service that Our Goal delivers is a school based mentoring and physical activity program. So it's working with teenage girls that are dropping out of sport and PE, and like co designing programs with those girls that are designed to overcome barriers that they're facing and give them like positive experiences of physical activity.
I think like as well what you said about the 43%, like it's crazy because that sort of information sort of isn't that well known, like the stats and sort of the figures around that aren't that well known to, to most people. They wouldn't have heard about that, and that's sort of how that sort of what you're doing links into what we're doing as well, because we're trying to sort of bring light to these facts and these you know figures and what can be done sort of surrounding that. But obviously sort of you've set up this amazing company, and you know like you say you're really trying to sort of address that issue and sort of do what you can to help. Obviously there's probably many reasons, and this is, you know, there's probably many reasons why, but sort of from your experience, what do you think is sort of the main reason why sort of girls disengage, you know, with football and sports? Is there one specific reason that stands out, or do you think it's a number of different factors really?
Yeah, I think it is a number of different factors. I think some of them more girls experience than others. Like, just going back to that study that I mentioned for women in sport, because I use a lot of their like stats when I talk about why I do what I do and why there's a need for it. But this work was particularly around teenage girls, and the stat was 61% of teenage girls feel judged while doing sport. And actually, like the work that I've done with teenage girls backs that up. Like feeling judged is one of the main barriers to taking part in sport, especially at school, because you know, like you're around friends or sometimes not friends and like, you know, your classmates. And if you're not like a experienced sporty person that takes part in sport in their free time, it's not an enjoyable experience having to, like, for example, play rugby or do trampolining in front of the rest of your class when you don't feel confident doing that. Feeling judged is definitely one of the biggest barriers. All the sort of issues around body confidence and body image, like these unrealistic expectations that girls are exposed to, is unbelievable now. Like, I literally don't know how girls get through the teenage years today with like TikTok and Snapchat, because I found it hard, and like none of that stuff was there. So there's just like constant feeling like you need to be looking like a certain person or looking a certain way. And sport doesn't always fit with that, as I was mentioning earlier about my experience with football. There's literally so many reasons. Another one is periods. Like this study with women in sport found that 70% of teenage girls won't take part in sport when they're on the period, which is huge. Like, and we also know that that's a really good time to be taking part in sport. But like, I think that sort of when all of these barriers come together, it's much harder for girls to overcome them, and some girls face more barriers than others, like in terms of access in sport. For example, if you're in like more deprived areas of the country, you might not have access to like affordable community sport sessions, and so that's the time when your experience at school is so important, because it might be your only experience of sport at the time. So schools have a big responsibility there. But yeah, there's absolutely loads of barriers.
Yeah, there definitely is, and sort of they all really come together, don't they? Like you say, there's not just one. I know it's like you talking about sort of periods, and I've sort of started to notice just like the adverts on TV are sort of trying to address that as well. Like, you know, you see like the girl who's like ice skating and stuff on her period, and trying to include that in. I think that's so important, like as well. Obviously with what you're doing, sort of for anyone who maybe, you know, is interested and wants to learn more, how does it sort of work? You know, where was it sort of when you set it up, and sort of how does the actual like project or company sort of run?
Yes, so our goals are not for profit, which means that, well, basically, like any profit that is ever made is reinvested into the cause and what we exist for, which is really about empowering women and girls through physical activity. The way that it works, so we work with schools, and we work with, particularly within that school, with the girls that are like most disengaged with sport PE. So it might be girls that are like skipping PE lessons, not bringing the kit in, or just not participating when it's time. And we use that PE slot to work with the girls and deliver a co-constructed program. So the idea is that the girls, like everything that Our Goal does, is like designed with the girls that are the users of the program, because they're the ones that understand what barriers they're facing and what support they need to overcome it. So the program's like co-designed with girls, and it's a mix. So we do physical activity, but we don't just like, obviously we don't just jump into a football game, because this is working with girls that don't really want to be doing physical activity. But the idea is that we're creating like safe spaces to do it. So the groups are really small. We'll have like max 3 to 4 girls in every group. We'll be in a separate space, like a separate classroom or like little room, whatever space is available at the school. And trying to like, we just do like a bit of physical activity. So generally the setup of a session might be, we do half an hour of some sort of activity that the girls like want to try, or I've suggested, look, let's try some. I'm doing yoga next week, for example. And then that's mixed in with the other half of the session, which is like personal development. So might be like talking about goal setting, talking about self-care, those sort of like personal development things, that qualities and experiences that you actually can learn through sport and physical activity, and really having the physical activity as a vehicle for creating a space to learn about those things and have a bit of balance, where we're not just like going in and playing sport for an hour, but we're doing it in like a nice, incremental, enjoyable way. And also, we were talking about barriers before, but like one of the big things at school in PE is like girls won't try if it means that they're going to get all like sweaty and smelly for the rest of the day. Like I was like that. So it's very important in our sessions that we will start with the sport and physical activity, but then for the last half of the session, like the girls go get changed. We've got nice deodorants and sprays, and like we just make it like how you would want your, if you go to the gym, like you can choose what you wear, how you smell, like you've got time to cool down afterwards. Like I want it to be as similar to that as possible. Like it's about giving the girls, I guess, like agency and a bit of a chance to like take control over their own physical activity experiences.
Sorry, I just wanted to quickly come in and just sort of, because it reminded me to ask that question, sort of with the school, you say you work in schools. So sort of have the schools sort of worked with you quite well then? Is that something that the schools, especially in the area that sort of you're operating in, is it just in one area that you operate, and sort of how have the schools been? Have they worked with you quite, and sort of cooperated with you quite well?
Yeah, definitely. So at the minute, I'm just in Greater Manchester, in a few schools. And all the schools are really good. Like, I mean, it's beneficial for everyone really, because it's beneficial for the girls. Obviously, that's the whole point of why I do this. Sorry, if you can hear a noise, it's my guinea pigs are right behind this laptop, and they're like banging on the cage. So apologies about that. So the schools are really good because it's good for the girls. It's helpful for the PE staff generally as well, because if there's girls that maybe are not participating or not wanting to be there, it's actually can sometimes be helpful to have them like enjoying a separate session. So yeah, schools have been really good. And at the minute I'm in Greater Manchester, but just over like the next sort of few months, I'm now sort of developing this the way that the business works is that I'll partner with universities and then work with students at the unis who will go out and deliver the sessions in local schools. So next stop is Sheffield, because that's where I went to uni. And so that's the sort of next step where our goal will be. But the plan is like all over the country.
I know personally I haven't received equal access and opportunities going up through school, which is why I kind of lost that relationship with football. However, I've brought it back now and I'm trying to influence other younger girls that are in my mainstream school. How important is it, do you think, to have those sort of role models and people that are coming in and showing that they care about the girls and care that they have the access to the sport?
Yeah, I just think like role models is everything. Just thinking about football in particular, and like what we've seen with the Lionesses since they won the Euros in 22 is an enormous, like absolutely enormous surge in like popularity, and girls just seeing that, one, this is possible, but also two, like this is cool. Like girls want to be seen to be playing football, which is such a shift that we haven't had before. And so having like visible female role models that like you're saying, Emmy, that can like go into school is just like you can change someone's perception like that. If they see someone and they relate to one thing that you've said, they're like, oh, if you talk about your experience of maybe not always being, maybe dropping out of sport, or like for me with football, like I'm actually not that good at football. Like I've built my whole life around it, but I'm actually not that good at it. Like girls find that relatable, because you don't always, sometimes you can feel intimidated by sport because you're like, oh, maybe I'm not good enough, but actually like you don't even need to be good at it. Like it's about what it does for you as a person. I just think you can't underestimate role models. And I also think people like you, Emmy, and like younger people, it's even more relatable for girls at school. Like if they can see someone that's just a few years older than them, that's having such like a positive experience in sport, that's like so motivating for them. And that is what I think is like key to changing perceptions and helping girls like take their first steps into sport and football.
And sort of working, sort of what you said about the Lionesses there, obviously working in schools and working with teenage girls. Have you seen, especially in sort of the way you are now, have you seen the effect of like the growth of women's football, sort of the Lionesses, sort of the WSL, things like that? Has that sort of impacted teenage girls sort of in sport? Have you seen that firsthand, or do you think it's a combination of like multiple things in general?
Yeah, I've seen it. Less so with the girls that I work with in school, but I also do community like football sessions for girls up to around the age of like 12, 13. Actually, no, a bit older than that, maybe 14, 15. That is where I've seen it because literally like 5, 6 years ago, all the girls would have like the men's teams on the back of the shirt. And now that's rare. Like all the girls have got the female players on the back of the shirt. So for me, that's like such a like tangible and like visible uh, you know nod to the fact that now they've got these female role models, because that just wasn't the case. Like obviously we've had the role models all of the time, but they've not had the platform and the visibility, so girls haven't been able to just turn the TV on and watch them. Whereas now, like at training, the girls will be talking about Toon and Russo and all of the like lionesses, and I think that's like the most amazing thing in the world.
It really is. And like I think we've come so far, haven't we, so quickly in women's football. But obviously, everyone who talks to us and sort of with what we're doing, they always say, we've still got further to go. And that's a great thing to sort of, that's a great way to think in general. And obviously with what you're doing and sort of in general with women's football, sort of, where do you sort of see women's football going? Like, do growing, continue to growing and stuff like where do you want to see women's football go in sort of the next 5, 10 years time?
I think so. I like look at it generally from a sort of like grassroots entry level point of view, because that's sort of where I work. But I would like to see like participation increase. I think we can match, if not surpass, the amount of boys that play football in the country. It's not boys v girls at all, but I genuinely think like that it's grown so quick over the last few years that we can match that amount of participation. And as we do that, providing that there is investment in like the structures and facilities that we need, and like the clubs and changing room facilities and everything, that girls need, I think that we can create like a very basically like a thriving grassroots football community. I think increasing participation will be amazing. And then that kind of like, as we get more girls involved, that sort of talent pool increases, which means that every level of women's football in terms of talent will increase as well. And we'll end up with like, I mean, we already have an amazing national team, but we'll end up with an even better national team.
Yeah, definitely. And sort of, the work that you're doing is sort of, incredible. And I hope that that can be continued throughout the entire of the country and beyond, because, it's amazing, and it really could grow into something even more incredible. Obviously, with what you're doing, it's impossible to reach every single person in every single school. So if there was somebody sort of watching this who was maybe sort of in that demographic that you're trying to address, what sort of advice would you give them, sort of based on sort of the work that you've done and sort of your own personal sort of opinion about sort of keeping engaged with sport and being part of that sort of community?
That's such a good question. Because I feel like I do this every day. Like I work with these girls every day. But in terms of advice, I just think like find try and find the right thing for you. Like not all sport and physical activity is for everyone. You might prefer something on your own, you might prefer something in a team, but also like just try and take the pressure off. It can be so intimidating, like for example going to the gym. If you're not a person that goes to the gym, like any new experience or sport can be scary and intimidating, but like try and do it in like a safe space, whether that is physically like what room you're in or who you're with, who you go with, like uh do things with a friend. Like the more pressure you can take off yourself to perform at a certain level, like the easier it is, and it should be enjoyable. And like if you stick with it for a certain amount of time, you will feel the benefits. Like sport and physical activity has been proven like throughout history to have massive implications on your mental and physical health and well-being. It's not just about getting fit, it's like everything else that comes with that. I think like so many I think as we get older, like we understand that we can participate just because it makes us feel good. And I think sometimes girls put pressure on themselves and think that they need to do it and like be really good at it. And you just don't. Like you can just do it to enjoy it.
Yeah, definitely. And one question we sort of try and ask everybody, because I think it sums up sort of what we're trying to do and sort of what all of our guests are trying to do, and grow women's football and really sort of, get the message out there. And just sort of wanted to ask, what is it about women's football that, what makes women's football so special to you?
I think for me personally, like, it's been a community throughout my life, and it's been a thing that I've been able to like take with me, like wherever I've gone as I've got older, whichever city or country that I've lived in. I've always had like a football team that I can find and go to, and there's always been a community there. And generally, like, every single person I've ever played with has been like just on the same wavelength, because like we all just play football, and it's such a connector. And it's also, as I've mentioned, like so good for like mental health, and I think that can't be underestimated. So for me, like, women's football is just my choice of activity that makes me feel good and has like played a really important role in my life.
I was going to ask you is if there is anything specifically that inspires you on the days that you don't feel, because I know that everyone has days where they kind of look and struggle on some, like on days where it's like harder to do the things that you do every day. Is there anything that specifically inspires you to keep going?
Wow, this is another good question. Do you know what? I'm like having some of those days recently as well, where I love what I do so much, but obviously, like, you never, even if you love what you do, you're gonna have days where you find it difficult, and lack motivation. I think for me, like, I know that I've created something that's already had an impact on, like, a really positive impact on so many girls. And for me, like, if I were to stop, so would that. And I feel like it's just growing and growing. And so I feel like, I guess, like a passion and a responsibility there to do what I do. I'm going to throw in a quote here because this is my favorite quote ever, and it's the quote that made me set up my business. And that is that if you don't do it, it will remain undone for the rest of eternity. And for me, that is like, if I don't do what I'm doing now with Our Goal and create this, nobody else will do it the way that I'm doing it. So this is my opportunity to do that. So that is my quote that gets me through those days, Emmy.
That is a great quote as well. I think we kind of relate to that as well, don't we, Emmy, in terms of sort
Yeah,
of what we're doing here and what we're trying to build. And, yeah, definitely.